Hey YouTube, coming at you today with a bit of a cautionary tale. Now, my water has been varying on me quite a bit coming out of the tap, and I've also figured out that it varies even from the straight cold water coming in to the hot water. My hot water tank has a lot of scale in it evidently, and I get a 400-ish TDS out of my hot water, super hot water, nothing but hot water, and I'm getting a little over 200 out of my cold water TDS. The fish in this 110 gallon require softer water. They come from waters that are about zero, but that's not really realistic, and many people that I've talked to have told me that at about 200 TDS your fish will still be able to breed and still be able to function. Well, I've been following one and then two L260 plecos in a cave, thinking it was a breeding situation. And then I got to realizing that there was no breeding going on, that this was some other thing that was causing these plecos to go to these caves and to stay in them. And I began searching for a reason, and I was observing my fish, and my tetras looked pretty dark. So of course my first reaction was to test my nitrates, and my nitrates were a little high, almost 40. So that told me that I was either overfeeding or I had something else going on in the tank. Then it occurred to me that I'd been a little bit lax on my water changes, that basically I'd been topping off the tank for the last week with straight cold water from my tap, which is 200 TDS. So basically I've been adding 200 TDS water in on top of about 250 TDS water in my tank. And of course I got my TDS meter out, and I was almost at 400 on the TDS in this tank, which normally with my water is in the 260 range, and that's where I try to keep it. And I do that by adding a little tap and a lot of RO water. So in the past few days I've been jumping out my butt trying to get the TDS back down. And I've been doing that by doing lots of little water changes and using RO water to fill the tank in again. When you change your TDS drastically in a tank, a lot of things occur. Your pH becomes higher usually because the water has more buffering capacity in it, and it keeps the TDS from dropping. Keeps the pH from dropping. My pH normally runs about 6.8 in this tank. But when I use a lot of my tap water, which is about 7.4 pH, even though it's still only 200 TDS, the pH in the tank will also rise. So I have in effect, by my lack of full removing water from the tank and adding back RO water to keep the TDS the same or slightly lower, I have been raising my TDS slowly. So when you've raised your TDS and it's much higher than your fish are accustomed to or want to live in, you can't suddenly drop it 200 TDS. You can't pull 50% of the water out and replace it with straight RO and expect your fish not to go through some serious issues with that fast of a TDS change. So I've been slowly changing water, 10%, 15%. I get a lot of evaporation in this tank because I'm running it at 80 degrees or 79, and I don't have covers on both sides of the top of this tank. So it's about a little over a third covered. But I have a lot of water splashing because I'm trying to highly oxygenate the water, and it creates a lot of evaporation. I will evaporate 5 gallons in a couple of days easily. Normally, I have been topping off with RO water, which maintains the TDS. But because my TDS of my tap water had gotten down around 200, I decided that I was going to use as much of my normal tap water as I could, because the normal tap water has a lot more minerals in it that aid plant growth. And I just want you to know that it's very important to be very aware of what the water parameters are in your tank. We all get comfortable with our normal water changes and our slight variances due to life and stuff that goes on that we have to spend more time doing than paying attention to our fish tanks. You have got to maintain a steady eye on what is going on in your fish tank. Because if you don't, it can get so far out of whack that when you try to recover, when you try to suddenly recognize an issue and then try to fix it immediately, you can cause your fish to have serious problems. Old tank syndrome is the same thing. You're changing 10% of water a week, and you go on for 2 years like that, and there's nothing wrong with your fish. And then something happens and you have a fish die, or you have an outbreak of some disease, and you change 50% of the water in the tank, and suddenly your fish are all at the surface gasping for air or dying. And that's old tank syndrome. Your fish get slowly accustomed to super high nitrate concentrations, to super high or super low pH and TDS, and then suddenly you try to go back to a full water change and your fish start dying. So it's critical that while we maintain regular water changes and stay on top of what's going on in our tank, it's also very important that you slowly move backwards if for some reason you get out of whack. A 50% water change is not always the best thing for your fish, because that 50% water change can result in such a shock to the fish in your tank that it creates issues. Now, I still have several L260s hanging in caves, and right now my water TDS is about 280. So I'm getting close back down to where it was, and I'm hoping that these L260s come out of their caves and start showing a more normal behavior. Lucas always says don't fight your water, and he's right, but sometimes your water parameters are such that you have to fight your water. And when you are fighting your water, i.e. you can't get what you want out of the tap that matches what your fish need, and you have to buffer up or down through Texas Holy Rock if you're going up, crushed coral, substratas that are high in calcium if you're going up, or conversely if you're going down, acidic substratas, lots of plants, lots of driftwood which will lower the pH in the tank, lots of leaf litter. There are ways to move up and down. The easiest way that I know of going down is RO water, because there's no buffering capacity. There's zero TDS, or very close to zero TDS. So if you need to bring your TDS and your pH down in a tank, RO water is probably the most effective way of doing it. But it's a very careful balance. It's a razor's edge, and you have to be constantly watching what's going on in your tank. And just like everybody else, I've got to admit that I let it slip. I was so busy watching whether my fish were breeding or not, I wasn't paying attention to what was actually going on with the parameters in my tank. And I think that I've finally figured out and am rectifying what was going on in my tank. Good luck, YouTube.